Hello there and welcome back to War Thunder. Today I will show you the tank review on the IPM1, aka the insane price M1 Abrams with actually what it is called improved performance. Now it is the second 10.0 main battle tank for the Americans in the tech tree, and it comes after the M1 Abrams, as it shouldn't come as a big surprise, and it is the third Abrams version, so to say, including here the XM1 GM premium version. And the Americans actually seem to kind of dominate at the moment the outcome of high tier battles, because they have a lot of things to fill their lineups with. As I said, the XM1, the M1 and the IPM1, together with obviously helicopters and also then FJ4B with the big rockets, together with additional CAS and, you know, quote-unquote regular tanks like the M163 and other M60 variants, together with the MBT XM803, which are actually not that bad. So the Americans can throw a lot of material into the battle. Now, the final verdict on the tank I will talk about at the end of the video, so please stay tuned because it might surprise a lot of you out there. Then also we are just explicitly looking at this tank's performance, and again there is a big surprise when it then comes to the ammunition, so stay tuned. So I think that's the good introduction. So again, the final verdict will come at the end, and that means now we'll begin with the armor. Now, with the usual armor view and also in combination with the protection analysis, we will not see all that fancy news, because below that relatively thin top plating we will find some composite armor that actually gives the M1 Abrams and the IP version the protection. Now, a few words. First of all, the lower glacis is less angled than on the normal M1, and that is kind of feelable for certain shells. Too many to really name them, but the lower glacis is actually pretty weak. But to get penned here is actually not the end of the world, as we'll see later on. The same goes actually for the turret, but obviously with much better protection. Now, let's first talk about the side armor and the rear and the top before we actually come to actually have an in-depth look at the composite armor. So the side is here 25mm thick and 30mm, with some composite side skirt of 65mm. This can stop here some stock SBAs with their APIT, but if they just shoot here below that or a bit on top of this, they will penetrate and deal massive damage. Here where the engine compartment is, it is massively thinner with just 6.35mm, and below that we actually go down to 27.6. So this can be easily penetrated by SPAs. They will set you on fire and also spread around their fragments. The rear 32mm. The top is also not that bad with 32mm, but there are some parts with only 5mm. So if you are unlucky and biplane shoots that with a machine gun, it will damage and eventually kill your engine and set it on fire. So there is this, and yeah, now let's talk here a little bit about the overall armor protection. So here we see composite armor, and they have overall the same composition, 38mm of rolled homogeneous armor with 600 and 800mm of nearer elements respectively, with the gun mantle having only 400, and then also some inner rolled homogeneous armor. So the lower glacis is a big target and it's in one piece, but internally it's separated into three parts. In the middle there is the driver. That's the only thing that will actually interact with the shell in a very bad way for the driver. And then we have to the left and to the right the fuel tanks that are also shielded off from the interior by additional 19mm rolled homogeneous armor platings. So effectively this means if you hit here with an AP FSTS or a heat shell, it either gets absorbed or it just disappears in the fuel tanks. And even if it has the punching power to go through, very often this here stops it. Just the most powerful shells will go right through this entirely, especially if you shoot slightly from below. Now here, this part is actually made to cause a lot of ricochets, and indeed it does, but very often they just then ricochet up into the turret ring, or just here on the underside of the turret, which is not very good. Again, we can see that there are various different angles, and the right side is in fact stronger than the left side. Now, to be honest, currently in the game there is no chemical warhead that will go through this composite armor, and yeah, even the hot rocket will be absorbed. Against APFSDS, it begins with the Rheinmetall L44 with the APFSDS that you can get penetrated and through the turret cheeks from a distance of 400 to 500 meters, but it's not very reliable. But tanks such as the MX-40 and the Type 90, they will blast right through, including the upgraded shell of the Russian 125mm smoothbore gun. So those are your enemies that you have to focus first. But the big weakness are the three things. First of all, here the gun barrel together with the gun mantle. Even an L7 APDS, a stock APDS round, will penetrate here and make the gun breech black and damage here this module and cost you the firepower. And this is a weakness together with the shot trap on the turret ring that this tank shares with, I guess, all the top tier tanks, the top tier main battle tanks, I should say. Now, one further weakness that this tank is susceptible to is actually the HE shell from the Russian 125mm guns. It has 47mm of penetration, so if you bring it to detonation here, or just where this 50mm, this 51mm plating doesn't interact, so you shoot a little bit to the side here or here, it splashes down and deals a lot, and I mean a lot of damage. The same goes here, it could splash up and just make the gun breech black. And very often, even if it detonates here on the turret cheeks, it makes here either the tracks a bit more colorful or damages the gun barrel. I'm not kidding. But the one shot trick pony, I should say, is here the cupola, or here on this part where the shell just ignites, detonates, and sends the shrapnels down through the 38.1mm top plating on this part, and there it is even thinner, and that will do a lot of damage, as you can see here. Overall, as I said, we have 4 crew members, the driver being the APDS stopper of choice of the, well, lower glaciers, gunner and commander sitting on the right, with the loader on the left. So very often, if somebody chooses to shoot your turret cheeks, he will choose this one for numerous reasons. First of all, it is thinner and weaker, so there is higher probability to go through. Then obviously you will kill at least 2 crew members with the gunner and commander. Instantly this tank then ceases fire. And then one very important thing, this rolled homogeneous armor plate of 38mm is the last stop before the blowout panel ammo rack. So we go back to the ammunition. We have 3 ammo racks. We have 3 shells here in the hull and also 8 here. So if you take out 11 shells, with 1 being already in the breech, those 2 ammo racks are empty, and it is highly recommended that you take them out. I mean, you have 55 shells, that's more than enough for a normal battle, even a very good battle. I mean, 30 to 40 shells are everything that you need for 2 or 3 battles. So take out 10 shells and you're just left with this one. And even if this is very empty, then the last remaining shells are here on this side. So on the tank's left side if you look at it, or right side if you look from the rear to it. And yeah, that means that if you punch with a very strong APFSDS, just a few tanks actually can do it, the Type 90 APFSDS and also the APFSDS of the MX-40, and maybe sometimes even the Soviet upgraded APFSDS, especially from close quarters. They will punch through all those things, including the optics, commander and gunner, shoot through this and then ignite the armor. And then it actually counts as an ammo rack because the protection ceiling, this plate, has a hole, and the propellant charges will actually spread into the interior in terms of being on fire, and that is relatively unhealthy. And it doesn't really matter which kind of ammunition type you have loaded there. So there are a lot of false claims out there, and if you hit an APFSDS shell or heat shell or any other shell type, it's the propellant charge that actually makes the trouble. One final note here, we have actually the big power pack in the rear, and the tank actually is unable to shoot back in terms of depressing the gun down, so you can actually hide behind the tank and just shoot him through the engine. And this is actually a very reliable one-shot, so the tank can take numerous shells, especially if the opposition doesn't know where to exactly shoot and which modules and crew members are already down. So this gives the M1 and the IPM1 a certain reputation of surviving multiple attacks, and that is certainly true. But in a true engagement, if you go out in a battle, as a matter of a fact, you get just shot in the turret ring and that's it. So how can you one-shot this tank? HE shell, or big HE shell rather, here in this optic, or here with a good spread down under the gun, or with APFSDS, just shoot the turret ring or the gun mantle, and at least you take the tank out of its combat capabilities. With the ammo rack, well, you actually can still ignite them if you shoot from the side, but then it just will empty the ammunition storage, sometimes the tank being even not on fire, as you might just see in the footage right now. So without, with this in mind, let's talk about some other aspects of the tank. When it comes to the mobility, the IPM1, like the predecessor, offers the strongest engine in this comparison with 1519 horsepower from a gas turbine, but the IPM1 is a little bit heavier than the M1 Abrams by 900 kilos, and so the horsepower to ton ratio is a bit lower, but still with respectable 27.5. Now this is a little bit more than the Leopard 2A4, but tanks such as the MX-40 and the Type 90 actually surpass you in acceleration and even top speed, which is again a bit lower than on the M1 Abrams. The T-ATB can certainly keep up, and the only one who is kind of left behind is the Challenger 1 Mark II. So that is just the one side of the coin. The other thing is it has the second best reverse gear, whereas tanks like the Type 90, the Leopard 2A4, MX-40 and Challenger 1 Mark II are actually limited or restricted to a reverse speed between 27 and 33 kilometers an hour. The IPM1 can actually go backwards at the same amount as the top speed, together with neutral steering. So that is great, right? Yes, but if you go in reverse, sometimes it's just a very touch sluggish, and it also doesn't really like it if you reverse and try to turn. Then all the horsepower to ton ratio breaks together and you're just left with a tank that turns okayish but not amazing. So the mobility is good, it's probably one of the best, but it's not the best, and all other tanks are actually, closing the gap quite rapidly. So if you're snoozing a little bit of the start of the battle, you're actually not getting any sort of significant advantage. So when we now talk about the business end of the tank, the gun, we are looking at the smallest caliber with the M68A1, the very same gun with the very same amount of ammunition and sort of ammunition than the predecessor, the M1 Abrams, and all other tanks might have bigger guns, but they don't have quite the same reload. 5.0 seconds is top notch. Only the Type 90 with the 120mm autoloader can actually meet you, and here's an autoloader. You actually have to go for a fully upgraded crew with the ACE qualification to reach the 5.0 seconds. But on average, if you compare it with the Challenger 1 Mark II, the Leopard 2A4, the MX40, and in particular the T80B, you have a decisive, feelable, actual advantage in terms of reload of at least a second up to 2.1 seconds. Then we come to the rest of the gun handling, and this is where the tank, together with the predecessor, really shines. So first of all, we have the best turret traverse with together the Leopard 2A4 of 40 degrees per second. That's SPA standard. Then we also have the best gun depression with -10 and best gun elevation with +20. The elevation speed is also second best in class of 24 degrees per second. This time the Leopard 2A4 takes the cherry from the cake with 40 degrees per second. But overall, the quality of the stabilizer is really amazing, because up even to full speed you can aim precisely. And now, while it still takes a little bit of practice to calculate in the shot and your own movement or momentum, because that will get carried over to the shell, to get the shells into target. But again, if you're shooting at the side of a Soviet tank, it will blow up with one shot, and all other tanks will at least take heavy damage. So this is now the gun handling, which is really excellent. Now let's begin to talk about the ammunition, and this is where it gets a bit surprising for you guys. The first ammunition type is the M735 APFSDS shell. It's the same shell that you get on the XM1, and 360mm of penetration together with a muzzle velocity of 1501 meters per second is certainly not bad. In fact, this is the very same shell type that you find on the XM1 and also on the M60A1 Rise P as the upgraded APFSDS shell. And surprise, surprise, all the gameplay and all the games that I played in that you will see are actually played with this shell, not with the upgraded APFSDS one, with the stock APFSDS shell. So that's all the tank really needs, and that actually hits hard home for the discussion about the M833 depleted uranium shot. It absolutely, in the current meta, doesn't need it. So that brings us to the second stock shell type, which is the M456A2 Heat FS shell. And again, this is stock ammunition, 400mm of heat penetration at any distance, muzzle velocity of 1173 meters per second, great for hull breaking, and that is really great for that purpose. So again, you can see you have two very good stock ammunition types, and again, it is completely able to disable any sort of gun breach or a turret ring that you will see in the game. It's a bit more difficult to aim, especially at long ranges and leading in comparison to the stock APFSDS, but effectively that's all that you need. For specialists, we have the M393 hash round, but in age of add-on and era protection and composite armor, the 127mm will actually do great for side shots and also hull breaking stuff, maybe even lobbing it over a ridge line if the opponent has loaded an APFSDS, but all in all, it's a shell that I rarely used. As a tier 2 upgrade, we actually have, together with the exhaust smoke system generator and also the smoke launchers, of which you have 2 charges, which come as a tier 2 upgrade, with the M416 now the third source of smoke, and you might want to carry some of them with you. Finally, the last shell type is a tier 4 upgrade with the M774 APFSDS. This is the very same shell that you will find as the final upgrade on the M60 Rise P or the XM1 premium tank, but it is quite outstanding in terms of price. In terms of performance, with a muzzle velocity of 1508 meters per second and raw penetration power of 415mm against flat angle and 194mm at 60 degrees angles of attack, it doesn't show positive normalization, but overall very decent performance, and is very very close to the Rheinmetall L44 first AP FSDS, which is the DM13. So not a bad shell, but the price of 900 silver lines is quite of strange, because I think on the M60 Rise P the same shell at a lower battle rating costs roughly a quarter. And again, this brings me now back to the initial shell type, that is the stock M735 AP FSDS, which I think is suited for most situations, to shoot through an engine deck of an enemy tank, to shoot through the sides, to actually disable the gun breach, and to also disable the turret ring, or just shoot through the lower glacis of some tanks. It's very well suited, so no problems for me, and you save quite a lot of money. And that then brings us to the repair cost of the tank themselves, which are very, very hefty, with 25,000 silver lines, which is really, really ridiculous. You die in 4 games, you just have lost 100,000. To make up for this, you need to have exceptional battles or not die. Here you also can see now some of the comparisons, and we can see the ammunition might not be the strongest in any sort of respect, maybe for the muzzle velocity of the Heat FS shell, but honestly the hash is not really outstanding, the AP FSDS is not really outstanding, and the Heat FS is also not really that helpful. And yet the tank has all the tools that it needs, with the very good gun handling, the very good stabilizer, the highest rate of fire, the best survivability, some of the best mobility and maneuverability, and overall armor protection. In comparison to other tanks, it is very versatile, and it also has some replacement with the original M1 and also the XM1 and some other tanks like the M60 Rise P. So I think the tank overall fits the meta. Now let's have a look at some gameplay and let's listen to the final verdict. So now let's bring all the points together and add some more for hopefully a worthy final verdict of this tank. Is it good? Is it worth going for? Well, what will the future bring, and how does it currently kind of stand up to the meta? Is it in fact creating the meta? Well, I think this tank is outright boring. Making this video was making me really feel like I have a job that I don't like. To be honest, I did my duty, I brought all my knowledge into this tank review, I played enough games to have a good feel for it, and how to defeat it is the same as you defeat your opponents. You just shoot the turret ring, you disable the gun breach, and if one shot is not enough, you shoot again. And this tank, with its brilliant performance, brilliant, probably best in class or best in game gun handling, with the best reload, is just creating the meta. And the majority of opponents are either the Leopard 2A4 or the T80B, maybe even flavored with some lower tier tanks. You rarely see a Type 90, at least much less than the previous two mentioned tanks, and I think I never saw an MX40. On paper they actually can compete with it, but what they don't have is a backup tank, a tank that once they are out of their initial tank can also continue the fight, actually still being able to punch the enemy team and kill their tanks. And so I think while this tank by itself is not a problem, there is just not one, and it also doesn't die in one shot. The entire American team consists of the IPM1, the M1, the XM1, hell, even the M60 Rise P is good. And if you then add further the brilliant CAS, including also the helicopters with up to 16 ATGMs, you kind of get the feel that there is a big inequality between the nations. And truly, the only nation currently, if played right, that can really stand up to this Abrams spam are actually the Soviets, with their helicopters and also with their high-tier CAS, and furthermore with their very powerful guns on the T64A, B and T80B. So I think this opinion is not very popular, but also if you add further the fact that very often you play on big maps that are filled with nothing but emptiness. And yes, I just overlooked this tank. Don't worry, I still get him. So this is kind of, you know, top tier tanks. So if all my armor is irrelevant, if all my mobility is much the same, why not just play the XM1 if armor doesn't really matter, and if it really saves you the repair cost of up to 25,000 silver lines together with cheaper ammunition. So I don't really get what Gaijin tries to sell me here. And also the stock grind is quite horrible for parts and FPE, let's face it. This is the same for every top tier tank. But at least with me getting a 30 days test drive, I kind of got a free Abrams out of this. With having said this, that's it for me today, and I hope that you at least can understand my final verdict here. I think the tank is just more of the same. It's very boring, and while it handles great, after you have driven this, what is there to come? Well, in the future I guess there will be much stronger variants of the Leopard, the Russian tanks, and also at the end of the day also stronger Abrams variants. And so while this might be currently some sort of king ruling the dead, it will be dethroned probably with the next patch. So again, that's it for me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Please give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other in the skies and on the battlefields of War Thunder.